When I invited my son to my birthday, he said, "I don't have time for that. I'd rather spend time with my wife than with an old woman." But when I started my business, he realized he had been too quick to judge. My 66th birthday was approaching, and though I wasn't one for grand gestures anymore, I wanted to mark the occasion with something simple, just dinner with my son and his family. I had raised him alone, after all. I had sacrificed so much, my health, my youth, my dreams. Surely, now that he was grown, he could spare one evening for me. I called him one afternoon, my hands trembling slightly as I held the phone. The house was too quiet, the clock ticking on the wall almost mocking me. When he picked up, his voice was brisk, rushed, as though he was already somewhere else. "Hello? Mom? Make it quick, I'm in between meetings." "I was thinking," I said softly, "of having you and your family over this weekend. Just us, for my birthday. We could cook together, maybe open that bottle of wine I've been saving." There was a pause, then a dry laugh. "Mom, I don't have time for that. I've got important people to meet. You know how it is." Important people? As if I wasn't important? As if the woman who carried him, clothed him, worked 2 jobs to send him to school was now nothing more than an old woman taking up space in his calendar? I tried to cover my hurt with a little smile, though he couldn't see it. "It's just one evening," I thought. "No, Mom." His tone was sharp now, impatient. "I don't have time for old people's dinners. Maybe another year. Look, I have to go." And just like that, the line went dead. I sat in the silence that followed, staring at the phone in my hand. The words echoed in my mind. No time for old people. That was what I had become to him. Old, unnecessary, a burden. I set the phone down and folded my hands in my lap. For a long time, I didn't move. The air in the house seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on me. But deep inside, something small flickered. Not yet a flame, not yet anger, just the faint sting of pride. Perhaps I had been dismissed, ignored, but I wasn't finished, not yet. This birthday would not pass in silence. The days leading up to my birthday dragged on in an unusual heaviness. I tried to busy myself, watering the flowers on the balcony, knitting a few rows on a sweater I had abandoned long ago. But my thoughts kept circling back to my son's sharp words. On the morning of my birthday, I woke early. The sun crept through the curtains in thin streaks, lighting up the quiet of my little apartment. There were no phone calls, no messages, no knock on the door, just silence. I tried to swallow the bitterness with a cup of tea. So this is how it ends, I thought. All the sacrifices, all the years, and not even a happy birthday from the only child I raised. But life has a cruel way of throwing truth right in your face. That afternoon, while walking back from the market with a small cake in my bag, because if no one else would celebrate me, I would at least try for myself, I passed by a cafe near the city center. Through the large glass windows, I saw familiar faces. My son's wife, his children, friends from his work, and at the head of the table, with a sparkling crown-like headband on her silver hair, sat his mother-in-law. The table was filled with food, gifts piled high in the corner, laughter ringing so loud it spilled into the street. My heart stopped. I froze on the sidewalk, clutching my shopping bag so hard my knuckles whitened. My son stood there, raising a glass, smiling like I had never seen him smile for me. "To the most wonderful woman," I heard him say, his voice carrying even through the window. Applause, cheers, laughter. My son hadn't just forgotten me. He had chosen to celebrate another woman on the very same day. The sting of betrayal ran deeper than I thought possible. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped the air right out of me. All at once, memories of years past flashed before me. Nights, I worked overtime so he could go on school trips. Mornings, I went without breakfast so he could have a full lunchbox. Winters, I wore the same old coat so he would have something new. And now, my love, my loyalty, my very existence was worth less than his wife's mother. I stood outside that cafe for a long time, my reflection faint in the glass, watching the life I thought I was part of unfold without me. Finally, with trembling hands, I turned and walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last. But inside me, that faint flicker from before burned brighter. It wasn't just pride now, it was something stronger, sharper. A promise I whispered to myself as I walked home alone. You will regret treating me this way. I may be old, but I am not finished. Not yet. The sound of laughter from the cafe, the clinking of glasses, the sight of my son raising a toast to another woman, it all echoed in my mind like cruel music I couldn't shut off. By morning, a decision had formed inside me, solid and unshakable. If my own son thought I was unworthy, if he dared humiliate me in such a way, then I needed to see it all with my own eyes. No whispers, no assumptions. I would look the betrayal in the face. That evening, I put on my best dress. It wasn't new, nothing in my closet was, but it was clean, pressed, and carried memories of happier times. I brushed my hair, put on lipstick, and walked toward the banquet hall where they had moved the celebration. When I entered, silence didn't fall. No one noticed me at first. The music played, people danced, laughter rolled like waves. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, and then I saw him, my son, standing proudly at the center of it all, his arm around his wife's mother. Everyone, let's give another round of applause to the amazing woman who has been like a mother to me, he announced, his smile dazzling. Applause roared, glasses clinked. My throat tightened. Like a mother to me. A few heads finally turned, and whispers spread quickly. Guests nudged each other, eyes flickering in my direction. Some pitied me, others smirked. And then my son noticed me. For a brief second, something like shame flashed across his face, but it vanished quickly. He straightened, his jaw tightening. "Mother," he said flatly, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "This is not your place. You weren't invited." The words cut deeper than any knife. Gasps spread among the guests. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes and muttered, "We told you to stay out of this." Her mother laughed, the sound sharp as glass. Poor woman, she just can't let go of the past. Laughter followed, not from everyone, but enough to slice me open. I felt heat rise in my face, a burning humiliation. My knees trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them everything I had sacrificed. I wanted to remind my son who had carried him, fed him, clothed him. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said nothing. I turned, slowly, dignified. Each step toward the door was a war against my shaking legs, against the tears threatening to break free. Behind me, the laughter swelled again, as though my pain were nothing more than another form of entertainment. Outside, the night air struck my face cold. I wrapped my arms around myself, breathing hard. My chest ached, but under the ache, something else sparked. Humiliation had been my gift tonight, but I would not let it be the final word. No. They had taken my place in my son's life, stripped me of honor before strangers, but they had also given me something invaluable: clarity. As I walked home under the dim street lights, I whispered to myself, "You will rise again, Gabriel. You are not finished." And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of age lift slightly off my shoulders, replaced by resolve. The following days were quiet, but in the silence, my mind roared with plans. I couldn't undo the humiliation, and I couldn't force my son to remember what I had given him. But I could remind everyone, including him, that I still had strength, influence, and the power to act. I started small. Calls to old friends I hadn't seen in years, women and men who had once shared boardrooms, community events, and moments of laughter long before my son had taken me for granted. They answered with surprise at first, then warmth, then eagerness as I explained my idea. "I want to host a dinner," I told them, voice firm, unwavering. "A gathering not to mourn lost youth or complain about betrayal, but to celebrate life, support one another, and raise funds for a cause we all care about." They were intrigued, and soon the guest list began to grow. People I thought I had lost touch with, neighbors, colleagues, old clients, even former employees pledged their attendance. Some insisted on helping with the arrangements. The planning took days. Invitations were carefully crafted, a tasteful announcement that this would be an evening of elegance, generosity, and quiet power. I hired caterers who had served the city's finest events, musicians who could bring warmth to any hall, and arranged a small program where guests could speak, offer donations, and showcase support for local charities. I watched my son from afar during this process, ensuring he knew of nothing. I didn't want him to interfere, to think he could manipulate the situation. He believed he had already diminished me in everyone's eyes, but soon he would see the truth. On the night of the dinner, the hall was filled with light, laughter, and a subtle undercurrent of anticipation. My old friends arrived carrying gifts and donations, each handshake and smile a testament to the respect I had earned, the life I had built, and the years I had dedicated to others. When I stood at the front, addressing the room, I felt a strength I hadn't known in years. I spoke of resilience, of standing firm in the face of betrayal, of the importance of community and legacy. People listened, they applauded, they donated generously. By the end of the evening, we had collected over $1 million, funds that would be invested into a community venture I had long dreamed of, a small business that would create opportunities and support others, all while honoring the life I had lived. And as I looked around, my eyes resting for a fleeting second on the empty chair I imagined my son occupying, I felt no bitterness. Not anymore. The humiliation, the betrayal, all of it had become fuel. I had been diminished in one man's eyes, yes, but I had arisen in the eyes of many. And this feeling of accomplishment, of power reclaimed, was sweeter than any apology I could have demanded. I smiled to myself. Tonight, I had turned the page. The days following the charity dinner were unlike any I had experienced in years. The hall had emptied, the guests had gone home, and the laughter and applause had faded, but their support had left a tangible mark. The donations collected, over $1 million, sat in the bank, earmarked for ventures I had long dreamed of, and for the first time, I felt the kind of control and empowerment I hadn't known since my son's betrayal. I called my longtime friend and financial advisor, Helen, a woman of impeccable judgment and unwavering loyalty. "Helen," I said, my voice calm but resolute, "it's time to turn this into something permanent. The funds are enough. I want a business, one that reflects what we've always valued: hard work, community, integrity." Helen's voice was warm, tinged with excitement. "You have the vision and the capital, Gabrielle. Now all you need is a plan, and we can make this real." Over the next weeks, I immersed myself in the work. I hired a small team of trustworthy professionals, people whose talents I had admired over the years. Together, we established a boutique consultancy that specialized in helping small businesses grow, giving guidance, support, and the kind of mentorship I wished I had when raising my son. The building we rented was modest but elegant, and we furnished it with care, creating a space that radiated professionalism and warmth. Word spread quickly. Clients came seeking our guidance, and many of the donations from the charity evening were reinvested as microloans to help entrepreneurs launch or expand their ventures. I watched as my idea flourished, as the combination of wisdom, experience, and capital transformed into tangible results. The thrill of success, once so foreign, now coursed through me. And then came the call I had been waiting for. My son. "Mother," he said, voice hesitating, I I heard about your business. I didn't know you were doing all this. Can you help me?" I laughed softly, a sound that was part amusement, part disbelief. "Help you? After everything?" My eyes narrowed, a faint smile curving my lips. "You had your chance, many times. You chose the path you took." His voice grew desperate, pleading, but I had no interest in sympathy. I had created something lasting, independent of him, independent of anyone who had underestimated me. "I have nothing for you," I said firmly, "and frankly, I don't want to give you anything. You have to build your own life, just as I built mine." Silence. I could hear his breathing, heavy and uneven on the line. And then, finally, he hung up. I placed the phone down and looked out my office window, where the city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth. I allowed myself a moment to absorb it. The hum of success, the satisfaction of reclaiming control, the knowledge that I was no longer subject to humiliation or betrayal. The world felt alive again, and I, Gabrielle, 72, had become the master of my destiny. By the following months, the consultancy had grown beyond what I had initially imagined. What began as a small venture with a few loyal clients quickly expanded into a thriving business network. Entrepreneurs came from across the city, seeking not only financial guidance, but mentorship, moral support, and a sense of integrity that my firm had become known for. Every day, I walked through the office with my head held high, greeting employees and clients alike, feeling a satisfaction that no betrayal could ever diminish. And yet, the shadow of my son lingered. Word had spread, as it inevitably does in families, and soon I received another call. His voice, sharper this time, tinged with arrogance, demanded my attention. "Mother," he began, as though he were entitled to the air I breathed. "I know you've made a lot of money. I want my share. I want my share. After all, I am your son." I listened carefully, letting each word land like a pebble in a pond, watching the ripples of entitlement collide with the calm surface I had restored in my life. "Your share?" I asked, slowly, letting the words taste bitter on my tongue. "Do you think a lifetime of disrespect, indifference, and humiliation entitles you to my success? You were given everything you needed to build your own life, yet you chose entitlement over effort, selfishness over respect. There is nothing for you here." There was a pause. I could hear his shallow breaths, the frustration building. He attempted to argue, to cajole, to remind me of ties I had never considered sufficient to justify his claim. But I had anticipated this, and I felt no hesitation. "I will not give you anything. You will not manipulate me or my business. I am 72 years old, and I have worked too hard, suffered too much, and endured too long to let you dictate my life. I am done with excuses, done with apologies, and done with giving what is mine to those who would only take it and despise it." His silence was long and heavy. Then, with a sharp click, he hung up. I sat back in my chair, the weight of confrontation lifting, replaced with a serenity that only comes from claiming one's dignity. The office hummed with activity around me, and I realized how far I had come, not just financially, but in strength, in self-respect, in independence. I was no longer vulnerable to the whims of family drama. I had learned to protect myself, to stand firm, to thrive despite betrayal. That evening, I walked to the balcony overlooking the city, lights glittering like jewels below. The air was crisp, scented faintly with the promise of autumn. I breathed deeply, a slow, deliberate breath that filled my chest with pride. At 72, I had reclaimed my life. I had transformed humiliation into triumph, disrespect into empowerment, and betrayal into the catalyst for my greatest accomplishments. My son would learn, eventually, that a mother's love does not grant entitlement. It grants lessons, opportunities, and boundaries. And I, Gabrielle, had drawn my line firmly in the sand. The city below was alive, vibrant, and so was I. Months passed, and the life I had fought so hard to reclaim settled into a rhythm of satisfaction and quiet power. The consultancy had grown into more than just a business. It had become a testament to resilience, a beacon for those who had faced betrayal, disrespect, or neglect and refused to surrender. Clients came not only for advice, but for mentorship, and each meeting reminded me of how far I had come, how much I had endured, and how much I had rebuilt from the fragments of disappointment. I woke each morning in my own home, a house I had purchased with the earnings and wisdom accumulated over decades, filled with light and memories, not shadows of resentment. I moved through my rooms with calm certainty, knowing that every object, every corner was mine, protected, respected, and cherished. There was a comfort in that ownership, a freedom in knowing that no one could claim it, manipulate it, or use it against me. The calls from my son had stopped. At first, there had been occasional attempts, pleas, demands, thinly veiled threats, but I had responded with firm boundaries. He understood, eventually, that my life, my energy, and my accomplishments were no longer his to control. I did not rejoice in his failure or frustration. I felt only the satisfaction of having preserved my dignity. I spent afternoons walking through the city streets, greeting neighbors and friends who had become pillars of my life, attending events that celebrated creativity, entrepreneurship, and resilience. Every handshake, every conversation reminded me that the world was wider than familial conflict, that life held rewards beyond the disappointments of blood ties. The charity I had begun continued to grow, funded not only by my efforts, but by the network of people who had seen me stand tall and wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. It was not just money, it was respect, it was validation, and it was a living testament to the strength of a woman who refused to be diminished. One evening, as I sat in my study overlooking the city lights, a sense of completeness settled over me. I allowed myself to smile, not a fleeting, polite smile, but a deep, satisfied one. I had weathered humiliation, betrayal, and entitlement. I had faced the mockery and scorn of those who should have honored me and turned it all into a life of independence, achievement, and respect. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it, silently, to the quiet triumph of a life reclaimed. Gabrielle, 72, had emerged from the shadows of family conflict into a life of full, unshakable dignity. And in that moment, I understood fully. Victory was not about revenge, not about restitution, but about reclaiming one's own power, standing tall, and living authentically. The night air pressed softly against the windows, and I felt a profound peace, the kind that only comes when one has faced the storm and discovered, in the end, that they were stronger than they ever imagined. I was free, I was successful, and I was undeniably, irrevocably myself. And for the first time in many years, I knew that happiness did not depend on the approval of others. It depended on me, and I had found it.